Welcome to Linguistically Aware, the podcast about all things linguistics. You are listening to CJSW 90.9 FM, broadcasting out of Calgary, Alberta, at the University of Calgary campus radio station, located on Treaty 7 land. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The City of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. My name is Brooklyn Shepard, and I'm a PhD student in linguistics at the University of Calgary. In this conversation-based podcast, I sit down with linguists, or language experts, to talk about the ways language and linguistics interacts with our daily lives. In this episode, I sit down with Cheryl, a current master's student in linguistics at U of C. Now, you might be able to tell as we get into the interview that Cheryl and I can talk a lot. So this interview will be broken into two parts. In this first part of our interview together, Cheryl walks me through what contrastive inferences are and how children aged 4 to 6 differ from adults in their understanding of these types of inferences. Now, this is the topic of Cheryl's current master's research, so I'll let her do most of the talking. Hi, Cheryl. Thank you for joining me.
No problem.
So I'd like us to just start off, if you could just start by introducing yourself, a little bit about your background and what you do at the University of Calgary.
Okay. Well, as you've said, my name is Cheryl. I'll just cover some of my educational background first, because that's probably the most important bit. But I have 2 bachelor's degrees, both from the University of Calgary. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts, which is just like visual art, mostly sculpture. But more relevantly, I have a Bachelor of Arts with a major in honors linguistics and a minor in speech-language sciences. I'm just finishing up my master's degree in linguistics here at the University of Calgary and should be doing my thesis defense this fall. So very close to being done. Yeah. And then at the University of Calgary, besides being like a master's student, which involves coursework and stuff, I do research on how children acquire their first language or languages. And I look at it from both a psychological and a linguistics perspective. So this is usually referred to as psycholinguistics. I'm also currently the president of the linguistics graduate student group called the Higher Clause, but that will be done in September when I pass the torch to someone else. And then I've also been known to be a teaching assistant from time to time. And then, in my spare time, I work part-time as a developmental aide for kids that need help with their cognitive development. And that's done separate from the university. So, yeah.
Wow, that sounds like a very busy schedule.
I barely sleep.
I know how busy grad school is,
yeah.
But I don't, I know on top of that, all the other things.
It's
That's
a lot.
Yeah.
It is, yeah. So that's why when September rolls around, I'll be doing just my thesis and then some part-time work.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah. Even with all of that time, you still have time for research. And I know you just recently presented some parts of your master's thesis at the Canadian Linguistics Association's annual conference, also known as the CLA, where your presentation was titled Contrastive Inference Abilities in Children. So before we dive into this, this is really what I would like to talk about today is your research. But before diving into it, I was just wondering if you could start by explaining to our listeners and also to me what you mean by contrastive inferences here.
Yeah. So contrastive inference, most simply put, because you can really complicate it, it's kind of a person's ability to infer information by contrasting what someone said with other information in order to derive some meaningful interpretation. This contrast is provided by so many things. It could be everything from what we've already said in a conversation together, what we share as knowledge between us or the world. It even includes deliberately leaving out information. So like what we could have said, but we didn't. Contrastive inference is something that researchers in psycholinguistics think could be involved with how we get a more rich interpretation and meaning of what we're saying. I'll note quickly that this is generally done in combination with other communicative skills, and the literature on contrastive inference is quite large. So I'll give you a quick example, though, to really illustrate what I'm talking about. So, and I'm going to highlight the part of contrastive inference that really talks about what someone could have said but didn't. So let's say that my brother Tim is telling my mom about the events of the weekend where he and I went to the zoo, and he's talking about, the animals we saw and what we did. And we all, looked at a bunch of different animals. We had cotton candy, whatever you do at the zoo. So my mom asks him, well, what animal did Cheryl like? And he replies with, well, Cheryl liked the elephants. So my mom asking what animal I liked here gives us some question for discussion in the conversation. She's kind of trying to introduce a topic to gather more information to kind of put it in her storage system, right? So we call something like this the question under discussion, or a QUD for short. And this is important to know. I'll get to it in a second. But basically, by my brother saying the elephants, when all other animals at the zoo are available as options or alternatives to elephants, is important. Because he didn't say giraffes or monkeys or penguins, he said elephants, that allows my mom to contrast the information that she received from Tim against all those other possible relevant alternatives. So the penguins, the giraffes, and the monkeys. And other animals that are probably at the zoo. And then she can decide that because Tim didn't mention any of the other animals, just the elephants, those animals were not a valid answer to her question, what animals did Cheryl like? So she can reasonably arrive at a more meaningful interpretation that I liked only the elephants and no other animals. Or else my brother would have said so. Mm-hmm. It would be weird for him to say Cheryl liked the elephants when in reality I also liked the lions and the monkeys, right? He would have said that. So the cool part is that, and this is where the question under discussion changes what that same utterance will mean. So, and what the alternatives would be reasonably. So, for example, with the same reply, Cheryl liked the elephants, we can enrich it in slightly different ways with different questions under discussion. So if she had actually asked who liked the elephants, then Cheryl liked the elephants, would it be enriched to mean only Cheryl liked the elephants and not also Tim, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because he's a reasonable alternative. Or you could even say something like, what did Cheryl think of the elephants? And then with the same reply, Cheryl liked the elephants, we can now reasonably infer that there are no other feelings or thoughts that I had about elephants, just liking them. Yeah. So contrastive inference basically lets us take what was said, contrast it against a set of alternatives that are available in the context of what we're talking about, and arrive at a more enriched meaning. So it's basically like a contrasting, comparing operation that we do. Does that kind of answer your question?
That very much answers my question.
I've had a lot of practice.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I mean, you are nearing the end, so you've been doing this for a while.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, it sounds to me almost like we're really talking about like almost like context of the discourse or of the conversation, right?
Yeah.
There's this context that you're getting from the question that's being asked, and also from the answer. So is this like, I'm wondering if, and this, yeah, we don't have to dive too deep into this if you don't want to.
Okay.
But so do you work with like under Gricean maxims or something? And if you do or you don't, could you explain what that means?
Yes.
Because that's just what it makes me think of, and I don't know if that's something that is relevant in your research.
So it is completely relevant, actually. My current research project, so I, without getting too deep into the different Gricean stuff, but, basically Gricean maxims are like these rules for conversation, right? These ideas that if we have cooperative conversation partners, then there are certain kind of conversational rules we follow when we're trying to gather information about the world around us. And quite frankly, it isn't unreasonable to assume that as we're talking with each other, the purpose of that is to gather information and kind of get to know more about the world that we're in, whether it's, in a silly way or whatever. The ultimate goal of conversation between human beings seems to be a deeper understanding of the world, whether it's the small section of the world with you and your friends or the greater world because, you're in class sort of thing. So Gricean maxims, there's four, and the one that is most concerned with kind of what we're doing right now would probably be what's known as the maxim of quality. Sorry, most of them are important. There's quality, quantity, manner, and relevance or relation. So quantity is kind of an important one, and that's basically the idea that we don't want to say too much and we don't want to say not enough, right? So we need to say the Goldilocks amount of information, right? I'm going to age myself here, but I'm reminded of like a Futurama episode where Zoidberg goes back to his home planet because it's mating season and he's trying to woo this very popular, highly attainable lady squid person. I can't remember her name. But anyways, he asks her, oh, what did you do? Or how was your day? And she goes on this like 30-minute tirade about what she did all day, about how she ate like a piece of toast and then she went to the gym and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh, that violates the quantity maxim, because all he wanted to know was how was your day, and she could have just said good, right?
Yeah.
So and then an example of maybe violating it the other way would be like, what kind of car do you have? Oh, blue one, right? That's actually not answering the question, right? So like there's a lot, like a better answer would be like, oh, I drive a Hyundai, or I drive a Jeep, or I have the big truck over there. Like a blue car is kind of like, right? And these maxims are really cool because by flouting them or by like breaking them or bending them, we can kind of get like deeper meaning. So like, for example, the one that we always use in our semantics classes, if someone comes up to you and goes, do you like this course? Or how was this course with so-and-so? And you reply, well, the handwriting was really nice. You're kind of breaking like a relevant, like you that's the relevance maxim, where you're not being relevant to the conversation, right? So like by saying that, we kind of like get a deeper understanding that maybe the class wasn't so great. Yeah. So, right. And then the cool part is you can actually cancel a lot of them and be like, oh, not to say the class wasn't great. I just mean that the handwriting was also pretty awesome. Like, so, yeah. So those are maxims, and that's the Gricean approach, is these kind of like underlying rules we have to conversation. And contrastive inference sort of follows that as well, in the sense that we kind of take information and we have to analyze whether or not it's being informative to the questions that we're asking. And by contrasting what we've said and what we haven't said to what we think the meaning should be, we kind of arrive at deeper understanding. And a lot of what I do is a little bit more simple than that, because I work with children and we want to get to like more direct like skills rather than the deeper what we call pragmatic kind of understanding of things, which is the field that I work in, is pragmatics. But even like very simple sentences hypothetically require some Gricean understanding. But there are other theories that go along with it. There's something called relevance theory, which is like kind of a more modern Gricean approach, which would be a whole 3 hours on its own. I encourage people who are interested to maybe seek it out. And then also like there's also something called like a grammaticalization approach, which is basically where they try to build some of the things that can happen that Grice explains in his kind of theories in a more direct way, like it's represented in syntax or it's represented in the sounds, and so there's evidence of it existing in a structural way in the language use. So what my research does, it doesn't really kind of hedge on either the grammaticalization approach or a relevance theory or Gricean theory. It is tied to all of it, but no matter what we find, there is an explanation in either of like any of those theories. It's kind of a more it's not that it's not grounded in theory. It's just more that depending on which approach you come at will determine how we would analyze the results we're finding. And I don't, because it's just master's thesis and not PhD work, I didn't want to put all my eggs in any one basket yet. So because, and as we get into it, the more I do the research here, the more I'm finding there's a lot more questions that need to be answered before we can actually make any definitive conclusions one way or another about any of the theories. And realistically, the theories kind of they're not like counter to each other. They're very much both available as reasonable without discrediting the other one at this time. So, which is kind of nice. So I don't have to say you're wrong to anybody. I just have to say, look what I found. It's pretty cool. But yeah.
You're listening to Linguistically Aware, broadcasting on CJSW 90.9 FM on Treaty 7 land. Listen to this episode or any other episode of Linguistically Aware in full at cjsw.com or Apple Podcasts. Just search Linguistically Aware. If you'd like to learn more about linguistics at the University of Calgary, be sure to visit our website, calgarylinguistics.ca. Okay, sweet. Wow, thank you. That was awesome. That was a really good rundown of kind of just the relevant theories. Even if they're not theories that you're specifically working under, I think it gives us a good sort of understanding of the research context that you're in right now.
Yeah.
So moving on to more specific things about your thesis work. So going off of your CLA presentation, I know one of your research questions was something along the lines of, do children exhaustify sentences like Sally bought candy? So I'm just wondering if you could tell me more about what it means to exhaustify.
Yeah, that's not really a term we use, is it? In the real world? It's super specific.
It's not a term we use, I think, in other areas of linguistics also.
Yeah.
It's very...
I'll give you a hint. My word processor thinks it's not a word. So.
Yes. Yeah.
It's really annoying writing your master's thesis when your thing goes, you have a lot of words that don't exist in here. And you're
yes,
like,
mine does that too.
I made it up. Now, I didn't make this one up. So... I could spend days discussing what exhaustivity and exhaustifying actually means in pragmatics and acquisition research. There's a very robust literature on this topic. It's very extensive. So I'm going to give you like the Coles notes or like the TLDR version. So I'm realizing not everyone knows what Coles notes are anymore. So for the purposes of my research, and for now, it's best thought of as part of the cognitive process that we utilize in order to arrive at a more enriched meaning. So to be clear, we're not exactly sure how exhaustification works in our brains, but to illustrate the concept, you might consider it sort of like an algorithmic checking tool we use when we take information we have available, so from prior context, world knowledge, shared information between our conversation, partners, etc., and then we check that information we have against the available possible information that could be relevant to the conversation. Kind of like a big old if-then running through a list. Yeah. So thinking about like the Cheryl Elephants example, it feels weird that I included myself in my own example. I'm not that vain, I promise. I just wanted to use my mom and brother in the example because they hate it when I do that. So since my mom asked what animal I liked, right? Exhaustification takes what Tim said, the elephants, and compares it to the set of alternatives and eliminates options that we don't need because they're not relevant to this question under discussion. So it basically goes, okay, elephants, yes. Alligators, no. Giraffes, no, right? It's like a negating alternatives process. And that's what we call exhaustification. And we exhaustify possible alternatives against what was said and arrive at some meaningful interpretation. In this case, Cheryl liked only the elephants and no other animals, or else I would have said so. And that's the Gricean bit.
Yes.
Exhaustification basically can just be thought of as part of the tools we use as part of our contrastive inference skill set. And we use it in other types of inference as well. So, yeah. Does that answer your question?
That absolutely answers my question. Thank you. That was was very awesome. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I think you really broke it down in a way that makes sense. So now I'm curious, now that we've sort of broken down these different pieces of your research and the different terminology that you're really working with, I'm wondering if you could go into a bit more detail about how you went about answering this research question and what you've found so far. So like what actual experiments have you done, or what kinds of Yeah, what exactly have you done and what have you found so far? I know you're not done, but if you have anything that you found so far that you think's interesting, I'm sure we'd love to hear it.
Yeah. So a sentence like Sally bought candy can, what we would call that in linguistics is basically a canonical word order sentence where you have a subject, a verb, and then an object. Sorry, I'm banging the table. So, we have the subject Sally, she's buying the candy, right? So these are really simple sentences that children hear all the time and that we say all the time, right? And to answer that, we do need to run an experiment. And I want to know how children are working with sentences like Sally bought candy. I'm going to just completely knock this mic over by accident with talking with my hands.
That's okay.
So with Sally bought candy, it's a really simple sentence. The reality is, depending on the context, it can be ambiguous, right? So what I've done is I have participants listen to a super short story, like 2 sentences long, and answer a simple question about the stories that a forgetful character asks them. So for example, participants would hear, and I'm going to use an example here that is not in my stimuli, but basically they hear something like Bill and Ted are going to a birthday party and they need to bring a present. Ted bought a time machine. Ted brought a time machine, right? This is not one of the sentences again, but alternatively, they might also hear the same sentence, but instead they would hear, Bill and Ted are going to a birthday party and they need to bring a present. Only Ted brought a time machine, right? So there's a little difference. There's Ted brought a time machine and only Ted brought a time machine. So in the first example where Ted brought a time machine, actually in both examples, I have a forgetful character. His name's Forgetful Gary, and he'll come on the screen. He's a little puppet because this is for kids, and he will ask a question. He will go, did Bill bring a time machine? Now, in the example where the narrator said only Ted brought a time machine, the answer to that is quantifiably no. Only Ted, right? However, if you hear Ted brought a time machine and I ask you if Bill brought a time machine, the answer to that could be no, because I didn't mention what Bill brought, so it must not have been the time machine. So that's reasonable. That's a Gricean relevance thing, right? However, I didn't tell you. So another reasonable answer might be, I don't know. You didn't tell me.
Yeah.
Right? So in this case, I actually don't care what people say. I just want to know what they're saying, both adults and kids. So I look to see how people answer this question with a yes, a no, and I don't know. With little kids, maybe they might say banana and think it's the right answer. They do some weird, funny stuff. But because I'm interested in children, we have to also look at the adults to see what they're doing. Because when you do child research, what you're trying to do is not just like see what kids are doing. What we're trying to actually study is how do children get to an adult-like comprehension of language. And it is super unclear how we get from childlike interpretation to adult-like interpretation. Yeah. And there seems to be some disconnects between the two. I don't know if you've talked to kids a lot, but they interpret things in very strange and unique and fun ways. So there are differences, and it's quite a journey. So we need to know what the end point is. We need to define what adults are doing, and then we need to compare what the kids are doing and seeing how like adults it is. So I also test adults. And what they're doing is pretty clear and what I expect, which is good because as an adult myself who also speaks English, I would expect them to do something similar to what I might do, right? So when we hear something like only Ted brought the time machine, adults say no. Bill didn't bring the time machine 100% of the time. Awesome. Great.
Good. They're doing the task. Good.
Only's cool. It makes you exhaustify. It says nobody else is allowed, just the thing I mentioned. It forces it, right? So for adults to do something different than say no in that case would be super weird. And they're not, which is great. However, with adults, when we go, Ted brought a time machine, and then I ask if Bill brought one, and there's no only involved, about 60% of the time, they say, no, Bill didn't bring a time machine. But 40% of the time, they say, I don't know. You didn't tell me. Yeah.
Interesting.
And this is expected and what I thought would happen. So it's also super interesting with the adults because we have like an order difference. Some adults get the onlys first, and then they get the ambiguous ones second. And when that happens, they get a little caught. They kind of pick a processing. Well, they'll either go with I don't know, and that's what they'll do the whole way through, or they'll go with they'll take a pause and go, no, she would have said so no. And then that's the strategy they go with. However, in the adults, when they get the ambiguous ones first and then onlys come in second, they go, oh, I made a mistake. I didn't know only was an option. Mm-hmm. Therefore, I probably should have answered differently on the first set. Mm-hmm. But either way, they're like, okay, right? So it's kind of interesting there. So adults, they're registering the ambiguity, but they make a choice and they go with it. So that's really cool and what we expected to happen. But with children, they're doing something a little bit different. So when we say children, I mean like 4 to like 6 or 7 years old. Mm-hmm. So like these kids, the reason we picked this age range is because they really know all of the foundation of their native language or languages already. They know the sounds, they know pretty good vocabulary. If they're typically developing, they usually have a pretty good vocabulary by 5-ish. They know how to ask questions. They know how to answer questions. They know enough that mm-hmm. they kind of seem like they should be adult-like in their reasoning at that point because mm-hmm. of how much language they actually have. So they have all of the foundation and structure. All that's kind of lacking is some vocabulary at that point, right? Well, they aren't quite adult-like, even though they sound like they're adults, right? And I want to caveat this, but I'm still in the process of testing children right now. I'm about 2/3 of the way done, so this could change between now and when I run my stats at the end. But
so we're getting a sneak peek.
It's a little sneaky peek with the caveat that it could change dramatically because, there's still a lot of kids to test, about 20 to 25 kids. So what I've seen so far, and actually this has changed since CLA as well, because I've tested about 20 more participants since CLA. So at CLA, about 60% of the time they were saying no, and 40% of the time they were saying yes, which is different than the adults. Now, though, with more kids, 70 to 75% of the time they're saying no, and the remainder of the time they're saying yes.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's different.
But not I don't know.
Not I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah. In fact, the only times I've gotten I don't knows, it's very clearly not the same type of I don't know that adults are giving. It's I don't know, I wasn't like paying attention, so I don't remember what the story was, versus the adults were like, I don't know, you didn't tell me.
Yeah.
Right? So it's very cool.
Can I ask a quick question? So when you say that they see this story or hear this story from the puppet on the screen, do they say their answer to you?
Yes.
Like do you record it?
Yeah, I'm recording what they say.
Like the audio?
And then I'm also taking notes and writing down their answers.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's very labor intensive.
It's not just like pushing a button.
No.
So you really get an idea of what they're actually...
Yeah. I record the whole session, just audio record it to hear what they say. It's super funny. One kid I had, he was maybe 4. He's like, the recorder can hear everything I'm saying, and I'm like, yes, and he goes, awesome, but yeah, it was really funny. So it's very cute.
That was the first thing I said when I came in here, when I came into the booth.
But it was very funny because I appreciated that the most vulgar thing a 4-year-old could think of was the word but. So, but no, they are quite funny little guys, and I really enjoy it. But I record the whole session, so I'm really gonna get the whole thing. I kind of like take annotated notes where like I say, oh, there's a slight delay here and all this stuff. In reality, I'm not going to be looking at timing or anything of their responses because I don't have time to do that. Yeah. But in the future, if someone in the sound area wants to look at that, there might be something there.
Oh, so, I might know someone in the sound area.
Yeah. Just, put me in the acknowledgements. But, but no, basically, sorry, my computer keeps turning off here. But, they are doing something a little bit different. And I haven't run the stats, so I don't know if it's statistically different or not. But, visually, the graphs look different. Mm-hmm. But the big difference is they are not saying, I don't know. And then the other big difference with the kids, I haven't looked at this one since I've updated the data. But on the only trials where they're hearing, only Ted brought a time machine. Oh, did Bill buy a time machine? They were saying prior at CLA, they were saying 60% of the time they were saying no, which is good, but they were still saying yes 40% of the time
Wow.
with only. So that's a little weird, but not crazy. And that's a whole other section of my thesis, but this is not the primary focus. But it is interesting because we didn't expect them to do that at all. So, right now, because I don't have all of the data collected, I can't really exactly definitively say what's going on, but I can speculate as to what's kind of happening here. And big grain of salt. This is a speculation and a hypothetical, but basically, children seem to be more willing to accept an interpretation where both people doing the activity is reasonable, where adults are not. And to be clear, in the stimuli, every action that the child is doing is not like, it's not a Highlander situation where there can be only one, right? Where one child doing the activity doesn't mean the other person can't also do the activity, right? Me riding my bike to school doesn't mean you can't also ride your bike to school, right? Or me walking to the pool means that you can still also walk to the pool.
It's kind of a sweeter interpretation.
Yes.
It's kind of nice.
Yeah, right?
Everybody's
it's a little
included.
more inclusive.
Yeah.
Ironically, I actually don't think that's why they're picking it that way.
And that's all we have time for in part 1. Join us for part 2 of this interview, where Cheryl gives us some speculations as to why we're seeing these differences between kids and adults. In part 2, I also asked Cheryl about her advice for anyone interested in learning more about linguistics, and we ended up having a really interesting discussion about the field of linguistics more generally, and how it relates to so many other fields, including psychology, sociology, neuroscience, and even math and physics. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Linguistically Aware. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the fascinating world of linguistics. If you'd like to learn more about linguistics, please visit our website, calgarylinguistics.ca. Until next time, keep exploring the beauty of language.